Are going to resume our deliberations this afternoon, and we are now going to turn our attention to workforce housing. So as soon as I can get my colleagues all to refocus, we'll get back to work. Ms. Miller, how are you today?
We are doing great.
How was lunch?
Lunch was exciting. Lunch or no lunch.
All right,
We're
let's do
ready.
part 2 of our workshop.
Thank you, Mayor. So we will start the Palm Beach County Housing Plan first with a presentation from the Housing Leadership Council. And we're looking for Skip. They're not here. I'm sorry.
We'll give you a moment.
We could do workforce housing policy considerations.
If you wanted to, Mayor, I was going to follow the presentation by HLC, but if you wanted to flip the order, I'd be happy to do my
That's fine.
presentation and go the other
Let's
way.
flip
if
it
that's okay.
around.
Let's do it.
They obviously didn't expect us to be punctual.
Mayor and Board, we do have the presentation on the revenue bond, so later on we will present it, or if MB Director is ready. So go ahead, Patrick. Good.
Very good. All right. So, following our workshop with the board in January, received direction from the board to come back to discuss potential changes to the workforce housing program in support of creating more units. We were going to discuss this in February, then the decision was made to postpone that so we can do it all in total context of discussion points. So we are here today to do that. For our new commissioners who have not gotten to experience full work yet with workforce housing program, very short history. Program was adopted in 2006. It's a mandatory program that requires a percentage of units to be dedicated as workforce, deed restricted as workforce price points. That was done in 2006. We made significant revisions to that program in 2010. You'll recognize that date as being the depths of the recession, and then again made further changes to it just about 3 years ago or so. Now, I tell you that that August date was when they were adopted. The work on that began about 2.5 years prior to that. So calling your attention to that August 2019, what the program did, long story short, incentivized single family and for sale provision of units through the program, tried to streamline the density bonus programs available to you. We increased the in lieu fee and then created our exchange builder option that was new in the program then. And then throughout, and I'll bring this up at the end as well, every time we have done this, we run internal profitability ourselves. And again, started this back in 2005, where we work with an economic consultant and develop model pro formas, and we try and hold ourselves to roughly 10% rates of return on for sale product, and then somewhere in the mid fives on capitalization rates for rentals. So we would never bring a recommendation to you or put something in front of you to for approval that didn't meet those working standards, those market rate understood ones. And we've, through the course of the years, worked with 2 different economic consultants. We would always have them here when the board would be taking them up for final considerations to answer those economic questions. So taking you forward, so again, the workshop just a few months ago, broad direction on increasing the supply of workforce affordable units, identifying potential program changes. That second bullet is primarily why we are here. Priority. So I will run through some very specific items. I would love to receive specific direction on these points. Absent that, even just assessing some of these board priority points and understand where the board might want us to go so we could make potential changes to code words and return to you in the near future with them. So I'm kind of throwing this out there as questions, but I'd ask you to keep these in mind as we work through the specifics as well. Board priorities on these, could they be on quick delivery of units, increasing the number of units, increasing on-site provision of units, increasing for sale units, and then single-family units. So we're highlighting areas that probably are deficient. If you look through our program, the great percentage of units that have been delivered are in the multifamily world, and obviously that's been a focal point of development the past few years. But
Mr. Rutter,
taking-
can you just, and I'm sorry to interrupt
Sure.
you, can you give us some sort of an idea of what we've accomplished since 2006? How many units have we actually been able
You
to
have-
point to say this is what we've put?
We have delivered, and I'm going to find my presentation, there are obligations for approximately 2,500 units through the course of the existence of this program. Constructed, I think we are close to 300 single-family, and I'm including townhomes in that as well. And then something in the range of well over 1,000, I think it's approaching 2,000, approaching 1,500 on multifamily units that have been delivered.
This is since 2006.
Since inception, correct. And I will get you even more precise numbers. I have it.
And just for a matter of perspective, we were told that we are deficient by about 100,000 units in the county?
Yeah, absolutely. 2,500 units have been created, obligated, since 2006, 273 for sale, and then roughly 1,000 rental.
Okay, thank you.
Hold it up. And then that leaves, yes, and I guess one of the points, is Ms. Baker's asking to share what's left to be built as well, and I would point out that the delivery of the units flows when the market rate unit, when the market project itself is built. So this board certainly sees zoning projects on Thursdays, and we might see a 200-unit residential project. It's not going to deliver, not put a shovel in the ground, start coming out of the ground for a couple years. And then via the timing mechanisms that are part of the inclusionary program, the obligation to deliver wouldn't be occurring for a period of time after that. So in theory, from when this board might see a zoning item on a Thursday to when the delivery of that unit occurs, you could be looking in the 3-year range.
But the ceiling is 2,500.
2,500, as we sit here right now, projects that have been approved, that obligation, we're right about there. As more residential projects come online, percentages of units would come on to the books in that regard.
Okay, Commissioner Sachs would like to ask a question.
Thank you. That's a very good question. So we have, and I just want to make sure that I wrote it down correctly. Since 2006, this county has had 2,500 units built.
No.
That's what I need to know.
2,500 units obligated at workforce price points
Obligated.
that were
Now-
part of residential development projects approved since 2006.
6.
Correct.
And 1,500 in addition, or,
Nope, that is part of that.
so part of the 2,500 is 1,500 multifamily units.
And I'm
that-
correcting myself in my numbers. It's about 1,000 have been constructed and occupied of the multifamily, and then a little over 270.
Wait, hold on. So 1,500 multifamily units have been obligated. Of those, 1,000 have been built,
I wasn't making a breakout on the 2,500.
right?
I'm doing it, if I could give you a number a different way. 2,500, you have about 1,000 that have been constructed that are multifamily.
Okay, so since 2006, this county has built 1,000 multifamily units.
Yes. That's not the county. These are units that flowed from residential developments.
Okay, that are workforce housing.
Correct. That are deed restricted at workforce price points.
And that's it.
For the multifamily, and then about, getting close to 300, about somewhere over 270 single-family. Meaning
Single-family homes.
townhomes or detached single-family.
That
Those
have been built.
Correct. Or under development. Completed or under development.
Okay, I'll wait to the end. Thank
Sure.
you. I just want to make sure.
No,
I got
gotcha.
this.
That's fine.
Thanks.
So getting into the specifics. So again, I'm just touching base on these priority points that be happy to take that feedback from the board on those. I'm going to bring you and touch on these quickly. I've got 7 bullets of specific points within the workforce housing program we could run through. So first of all, point out the in lieu fee. There's been discussion at the board level on in lieu. We did raise it to reflect 2019 dollars, and it's indexed to be addressed annually and as a price point. But certainly been some discussion and consideration for possibly eliminating the in lieu fee. We think that there are enough other options out there, and we could accommodate eliminating that. So that would not be be something we could absolutely recommend. Limited incentive option, a little bit complex, and let me try and walk you through it. And this will flow back to that overall board direction. Are we attempting to create as many units as possible? Limited incentive means you have the land use on the property. You're seeing a project on a Thursday. The zoning action to activate that land use, that 5 units to the acre, 3 units to the acre, whatever it may be, you need a zoning approval. If a given project has its land use, does not want to utilize any of the bonus densities, they would be taking advantage of the limited incentive option. They're not utilizing any of our bonus densities. The benefit to that project is they only have to provide half of their workforce obligation. So they're still receiving the access to all of their underlying density. Because they're not using any of the incentives, the bonus density incentives, they only provide half of the workforce obligation. And we'd recommend taking a look at eliminating that option and just using a different percentage, which I will get to in a second. Applicability of the program, it only applies in the urban suburban tier, does not apply in the ag reserve, does not apply in the ex-urban or rural tiers. We could make a change and expand the program to apply in other tiers. I would tell you that most of the projects you see in those other tiers that come through for significant density increase changes, certainly you're seeing a number of them in the ag reserve, we are applying conditions on the comp plan for workforce housing. So I would like to think that we're covering this need, this function, and the conditions that are there, but certainly it's available as an option, and we would be happy to take that direction. So standardizing the workforce housing rate, I think I shared with most of you. I'm partly guilty for this because I wrote this program, but you need to be a math major to figure out how to work the percentage, and different percentages apply to different levels of the densities throughout a project. One very simple thing we could do is create it as a flat percentage, just a flat number of units applicable to the future land use that you have on the property. You would still work different numbers on your bonus density, but it would certainly be a lot simpler. There would be a lot more clarity and a lot easier to understand. And we would recommend that we move into that world. We've broached it and just really haven't gone there in past versions of changes that are being made, but back to understanding some of these boards' priorities. If we're looking to increase the number of units, if we're looking to try and increase different types of units as well, this could be a key piece of that happening. Default disposition, another option available is, while we have a number of options in the program available to meet the requirements, we could establish, this board could establish through code that constructing on site is the default option. To do something different than that, be it the exchange program, be it construct off-site, or any of the other options that are available, those would come in the form of a specific request. They wouldn't just be baked into the development order report, and there would be greater attention called to it. That's an option that the board has available to you. And then incentivizing on-site and for sale units. We did a fair bit of this in the last round, excuse me, of amendments where we, working with the percentage of units that you're otherwise obligated to do, we reduced that if you constructed single-family on-site and then townhouse on-site. And there were different tiers of the reductions that would occur, but Back to, if the board did want to work with a flat percentage, we could very clearly then assign a discount if you're constructing units on site in these different types, the single family or the townhouse type. It's an option that's available. We would recommend, even more consideration on that point. You see the numbers there too. Again, we're short of 300 produced or in construction in the non-multifamily side. Those are much, much tougher to get our hands on and to make available. So that would be a great incentive, we think, to bring more of those about. And then the exchange option, which is new, and I think I shared with you as well, the current changes in the code are going to be 3 years old in August. We wrote into there that we would come back to the board at the 3-year mark and discuss the exchange option. So we're a little bit early doing that. But while there has not been a lot of activity on the exchange option front, it's something new, something different, and it's a good option that's out there. The one tweak we recommend is there's kind of two versions of the exchange. There's one where I, the market rate builder, have a partner in the workforce building world. When I come before you on the zoning hearing on Thursdays, I bring that partnership forward as part of it. So I'm one path of the exchange program. The other path is I want to do the exchange, but I don't have my partner yet. There are different requirements, and there's a little bit of a different construct in the monies you set aside for that obligation. But we would recommend when they bring an exchange opportunity forward, it is when there is a partnership developed. So eliminating that non-specific exchange option. The uncommitted exchange is a different word. So next steps, heard the points here. Again, I would be happy to take any measure of direction. Would really like to understand the points. If the board would like us to go back and write code words that created the maximum number of units or created the maximum number of units on site, or that those general points, will go back and then start writing the specific words in the code and make those modifications. I will further then need to work with our fiscal consultant, and we will begin to look at, does it meet the profitability standard and does it meet the statutory requirements as well as it pertains to inclusionary zoning. We can then return to the board with a lot more specificity on points. You can tell me which way to go with some of those, and then I would envision after that point, working with industry, sharing those points, having a couple meetings, and then returning to the board at that point with code changes that follow your direction. So with that, myself and some others from planning are here as well to take your direction, answer any questions you have.
Very good. Okay, Vice Mayor Weiss, you are recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rutter. Couple questions. On the in lieu fee, and that, my understanding, goes into a trust fund.
Correct.
Are there limitations on how those fees can be utilized?
Do you know that better? I'm going to ask Jonathan. I'm going to pull the code as well.
Yes, sir, Vice Mayor. Currently, the Board of County Commissioners have allocated those dollars to go toward down payment assistance for those individuals who are buying the for-sale units that are being created. That is currently the only eligible use of those in lieu fees.
And did you guys, was there any discussion about that at all, in any kind of looking at any kind of other programs that might benefit from having access to those dollars?
We've had discussions about that over some time, and I think today was the day, as we're coming back to talk about the workforce housing program, depending on the direction received, will determine if we should come back and present other options or if the program needs to stay as is. But I think the direction received today on the overall housing discussion will give us the guidance we need to know what to do next.
And then I suspect you haven't undertaken this, but have you looked at the available buildable land, or I guess it would be vacant land in the county that's got development rights available to it, how much housing would come from this program if you allowed things to be built at whatever the current land use and zoning allows for, and what that impact might be?
I don't know if we've done an exhaustive study of vacant, and I would include vacant and underutilized lands as well, because I think we might commonly think of one or two homes or dilapidated homes on a piece of property as being underutilized. A full assessment of that, I can't think of one that's been done recently on what the yields might be. I would point out, though, that number would have changed significantly 3 years ago as we opened up our bonus density program and made it much more readily available. So there's a number that the future land use would allow, and then you start applying a lot of these bonuses, that would raise that number exponentially.
I'm just trying to get a sense of how much, based on currently what we're doing, how much the program as it stands would generate.
We can take a look at that, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
How much money do we have put away from all of this in lieu of money that we've been taking?
In lieu fees, approximately 10 million.
And of that 10 million, I'm not seeing any correction on that. Of that 10 million, how much has actually been used? Or in addition to that 10 million, what has already been used of the in lieu of that we've collected?
I don't have the exact amount in front of me. We have closed well over 100 single-family purchases. I would expect that we've expended somewhere around $2.5–3 million, but I can get that number for you.
Mayor, if I could add one point on that, a couple things. The fund balance for the in lieu sat at, I think it was about $1.5 million for 5, 6, 7 years. This is a non-recurring value. There's probably not much by way of the ability to predict it, and certainly we would do everything we can to encourage the production of units as it comes along. I don't think I'm getting too far ahead of Jonathan when I say 10 million sounds like a good amount of money, and then it's also it would have a challenge being super substantive as well. It depends on utilization.
You're correct, Mr. Rudder. We currently have approximately 100 individuals that are bank approved, waiting for workforce housing, single-family homes to be built. And so again, it's really important for us to get those units built, because we want those units built while our bank financing for these buyers are still in place and before the interest rate rise. So at this point, we're not struggling to find bankable buyers. It's getting the units built, and that's always been our a thought of making sure we have dollars there. Now that the developers are required to build workforce housing units, we want to ensure there is down payment assistance there for them.
Okay. Just for matter of public record, Miami-Dade has declared a housing emergency. And so obviously this is not a problem that is just focused in Palm Beach County. This is certainly something that the entire region is being affected by. Commissioner Bernard, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know you've asked us to weigh in on this item, and I know for me, I'm not prepared to weigh in on this item. We have a crisis on our hands, and if, let's say, 2,500 units have been obligated since 2006, this is not, whatever we do with this, it's not going to address the issue that we need to address, which is we need to create units, and we need to create them immediately. So, I would weigh in on this after we've had the discussion regarding the bond, so in that way we can know, are we going to create units? And then, what else can we do to really create more units, or to change the codes, whatever that we need to do to create these units. So.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Sachs, you're recognized.
I'm going to go along with Commissioner Bernard when it comes down to looking at a number of these points, because there's many of them to address. But one that the mayor brought up, which was rather interesting, is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, we have about $10 million in escrow for the building of, in that lieu fund, where developers have developed, and then we give them incentives so that they can put the money in this fund, so that they will be obligated then to develop or to build workforce housing in another area. Is that how it works, Patrick, Mr. Redder?
No, actually, I would say, so market rate project comes along, it might have an obligation of 5 units. They could avail themselves of the in lieu option to meet that obligation, so they would pay 5 times whatever the appropriate in
understand,
lieu.
right.
But then that meets their obligation, so there's no construction of units.
Okay, so they put the money in, they don't have to build it. Right now, if I'm correct, what I heard you said is that we have the money, we have the people who need to live in these units, but we don't have a developer, we don't have a builder. Is that what this current status that I just heard you state?
Don't have units available to sell to.
No, excuse me, just a sec. We do not have a developer available to build these units at, that we have placed aside in this $10 million fund.
I don't know, Commissioner, if I would say the units, but we do have we do have dollars
We
that
have
are
the
set
dollars,
aside.
we have the people,
We do have home buyers that are interested in purchasing. The challenge has always been is that the cost of units at this time. And so just as the developers will talk about, county, we need multiple of your funding sources, that often is what is necessary. And so we're looking at those options as well.
so we're looking for builders to build affordable housing or workforce housing, to use the money that we have set aside, or they have given us, so they could have benefits in their development, so that we could use that money to fund workforce housing. We just don't have those builders available to build them now.
For the workforce housing dollars, I would say that the only strategy we have is down payment assistance. And so we're not necessarily
The
looking
circle,
for.
I'm sorry, maybe I'm not smart enough. We have $10 million. We have people who want to live in them. Why aren't they built? What are we waiting for? You're looking at Ms. Baker. I'm looking at you.
Commissioner Sacks.
You're looking to my left. So
Commissioner
let me, go ahead, Ms. Baker, go ahead. Explain this to me.
We've got a couple of pots of funding. The actual in lieu money, when the board gave directions to allow the buyout, those dollars were intended to help buy down some of the market rate units so we could get people in. That's where those dollars, that pot of money was set aside. And that's what we've been doing with those dollars. And correct me when I go astray here. There's another pot of funding that this board allowed me to set aside for the last couple of budget years, $5 million each year. So I've got $10 million set aside in ad valorem funding. So our issue has been projects coming in and spending federal dollars, HUD dollars, and SHIP dollars that are coming in, right, and putting a NOFA out. If there are shovel-ready projects, we can address it out of the $10 million in ad valorem funding. We've shared that information. Plus the fact that we've got NOFAs out on the street today for projects to come in, okay? And we can spend HUD dollars as well as some SHIP dollars that are out there. So we've got money. The problem has been, or the challenge, the opportunity, has been, we got a hot market. People want to be here, and so our older set of affordable developers are long gone. So hopefully we're trying to lure nonprofit affordable developers back to the community. We've had some conversations with a few, and so we'll continue to have those conversations. So we've got that money that we created, the board approved, that the in lieu money would do down payment assistance so we can bring down some of the lower cost housing. But as we all know, the market has significantly changed, and it's very difficult. I mean, we were at one point we gave a few folks $100,000 just to buy down the market rate. We can't continue to do that. Plus, the housing market, our median average priced home now is $500,000 or a little bit more. It wasn't before, it was like the mid threes. So it was easier to buy down. Today, we cannot afford to do so. So the question then becomes, if we want to, one of the things that we could do is free up or take the restriction off of the in lieu money and allow that to be merged with the other 10 million we have, so that we could move forward with working with nonprofits and for-profit developers, as long as it's within the rules, and utilize those dollars today, because those dollars are available.
That's a very good suggestion. Thank you, Madam Administrator.
Ms.
Thank you,
Baker,
Mayor.
just to clarify, and underlying, I think, Commissioner Sachs's questions was the fact that we do have developers who are willing to construct these homes. The exchange program has worked, that every unit that has been put into exchange is being developed, that we don't have units that are being put into the exchange program that no one's willing to build for us. Is that correct?
I am not aware that that is the case. I did speak with GL, and they told me the last time they put out an exchange opportunity, the last two times, they went really, really fast. I believe the exchange program has caught on, and I think it will work for us. We just need the builder to be, in a position where they've got the property, they've got everything that they need, and the project can start moving and move fast, as opposed to nothing being in place, making the deal, and then we're still waiting 4 or 5 years down the road for a unit to be built.
So but I want to clarify again to Commissioner Sachs's remarks. It's not that we don't have developers that are willing to build workforce affordable homes. It's that at this point, the process is not really generating the needed number of units to, again, meet this need, and 2,500 maximum ceiling right now since 2006 is not a really great report card.
You don't get an argument from me. We've been at this since really '01, and we're here today. And as I always tell you guys, I started out with long black hair. That's not the case today. And I have video that shows it in '01 presenting to the board, and again in '06 presenting to the board, these same issues. We've got to invest a tranche of funding for workforce affordable housing. And what we've got in place, in my humble opinion, is not cutting it. The 3% or 5% or 10% of the project, that's what we've got, and the option to buy out. So we're gonna.
The in
we
lieu
need
of
more
fee is not
commitment.
really satisfying the need. We're sitting on
It
$10
is
million.
not. It is not. It is far from meeting the needs. But we also have requirements by law and what this board has already set. And so any impact that we're putting on the developer as a part of our workforce inclusionary zoning program, we've got to ensure that we help offset that. Part of that, the majority of that has been with density bonus.
Commissioner McKinley, you're recognized.
Just a couple comments and questions, Patrick. I know we're not prepared to move forward on all of these, but I just want to express my support for the in lieu fee and for the exchange program. I do think we need to make the in lieu fee a little bit more flexible on how we spend it. The exchange program, look, I don't care where the units get built so long as they get built. I do think we need to look at the possibility of allowing for a credit bank, so to speak. It doesn't make sense to have a developer be responsible for building 10 units in this project, 15 units from this project, another 12 from this project. That's not an efficient use of their dollars. If you had a developer come in and let's say they were required today to build 25 units, but we knew in the future they might have to build 50 or 60 more. Why not let them build a 100-unit complex and then have those credits for any projects that they may bring forward? I think that way you get it built faster. The other thing, and Ms. Baker, you can shake your head at me if you want to. Oh, okay, because we're not getting them built.
Full
So
support.
What we have is not necessarily working, and we need
Right.
to get a little bit more creative. I also argue that we do have developers in our community in this part of Florida that are building or want to build affordable housing projects. I've got a constituent in my district, and that is his business. And he put forward an application for some of the tax credits from Florida Housing Finance Corporation. His project did not win the tax credit lotto. Meanwhile, we've got this project out there that he's got the whole plan put together and he owns the land to do it. Why are we not using some of these dollars to then go fund that application as part of our housing program? We know it's shovel-ready, and all he needs is whatever he was asking from Florida Housing Finance. Why can't we try to do that here and look at those applications that have been denied? The other thing, we need to be accountable to the developers that are paying these fees, because that's money out of their pocket that then goes and sits in our pocket. And if it's been 10 years and we're not spending it, is there a requirement for us to give it back, or do we just get to sit on it in perpetuity?
There is no requirement for us to give it back. However, I think we have to look at what it costs to put that unit in the ground. And we're not charging an in lieu fee equating to the amount it takes to build that unit. So therefore, it takes not only the dollars that they're buying out, but it takes other subsidies to make that project work with a willing builder to put those projects in the ground. We are well aware that we had a lot of vacant land in Palm Beach County. We have limited vacant land left. We have limited virgin land. And so a lot of this is coming from redevelopment as projects come through, and a lot of them are located within municipal boundaries. They're not located in the unincorporated area.
Okay,
But we're
so-
we're working with cities. Palm Beach, West Palm Beach is one city that we have worked with. We have worked with Pulte in the exchange programs. We've got rentals, we've got townhomes that are in the northwest section that we've invested dollars to make that particular project work. We look forward to working with developers in order to do it in other locations as well.
Tell me, Patrick, what or Jonathan, what the allowable uses of the in lieu fees are.
At this point, the in lieu fees collected are only used for down payment assistance for the developers that are required to build the workforce housing units to ensure that there is funding available to help them purchase those units.
So Lennar pays an in lieu fee for Lennar to give down payment assistance for a resident to buy a Lennar property.
Not necessarily, Commissioner. So what will happen is developers who are not willing, who are not going to build workforce housing units, they're the ones who are paying in, while the developers that are willing to build the workforce housing units, whether it is through exchange or not, it's those buyers who are receiving the down payment assistance.
So why aren't we considering, look, we know along the Congress corridor through the Palm Springs area south of Southern, we know one of the big issues there is the infrastructure in the ground for water utilities. We know that's cost prohibitive for a lot of developers to come in and redevelop those properties. Why can't we use the in lieu fees to help offset the cost of that infrastructure replacement so that those developers can come in and build units?
I think again, two things. One, the $10 million number looks interesting now. It's not always been that case. It's grown somewhat recently. So again, the non-recurring nature of it, there are times it will grow to a large number. So directly to your point, I think we've come back to the board and sought the direction, as Jonathan was discussing the uses that we have made of the money so far. I think if it was direction of the board, I would want to double check and take a look. I'm not finding anything very quickly in code, but I would want to do some more research on the matter, but if it was the board's direction to expand the uses in other ways, we could absolutely take a look and return back to have that discussion.
And then, Commissioner, if I can also add, we have other programs where developers could actually use SHIP dollars, home dollars, block grant dollars, NSP dollars to do what you're asking. They just need to submit the requests.
Okay. I'm just frustrated. We have 60 million in ARPA dollars. We have 25.5 million in sales tax dollars. We have 10 million in lieu fees. That's almost $100 million. And what's that? 10 in ad valorem. That's not the SHIP funding. That's not the CDBG dollars that come in. And here we are talking about how to build units. We have an in-house real estate department. Of all of those pots of money, how many lots have we gone out and purchased in the last 3 years? When something comes up for sale, are we bidding on, are we putting offers in to actually go out and buy real estate so that we've got a land bank other than what we require developers to donate to us?
May I respond? Commissioner McKinley, no, that has not been the direction of our boards in the past. When we do receive lots through our lien program where people lose their lots or units, we then turn those lots over to municipalities that the lots are located in. In the past, we've restricted it to affordable housing. And then that rule was removed, no longer just restricting it for that particular purpose. But we work with cities. We also, I think Limestone Creek is a very good example. We ended up getting lots in Limestone Creek. We worked with Habitat for Humanity. We turned those lots over, and they built those units within Limestone Creek. We'll continue to work through that process. If this board is now saying to us, we want you to scour and compete with others on lots in other areas, we can create such a program. But it has not been fruitful for the county to compete with private industry on land because they outbid us every single time. And we can only, really pay for land a certain percentage above what's the appraised value. So that's why we have not necessarily been out vying for land against the private sector, because we really can't compete with that. We just recently, in the last 2 years, that's how I got the 10 million for ad valorem. And with the boom in the economy, that's how we grew our in lieu fee so fast, because the market dictates what units can sell for. And it's more economical, and I don't blame private sector to buy out and use those units to sell for $500,000 or more. And so we've now got a pot of money. We're open. Patrick and I have been talking to developers along with Jonathan. We actually went to Fort Lauderdale, stopped in to see some of the projects that are going on down there. We had a conversation with the developer who's building in Lake Worth as well, and said, we're open for business. Come up and see us. We need units. We want you to come build in Palm Beach County. So it's not as though we're sitting on our hands and not trying to move, because we need units. I mean, again, this is not a new crisis. This issue has been with us for many, many years.
We approved the 1 cent sales tax almost 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. How many units have we constructed from that 25.5 million?
Sherry, how much have we collected to date?
Of the 25.5, we're working on our cottage homes, and I'm looking at Isame to tell me how many units that is. Okay, 22. And then the permits, the tax deeds are,
You're correct. So, good afternoon. Isame Ayala, Director for Facilities Development and Operations. We have 4 different phases under the ISD program. The first one is cottage homes, and that one has completed design, has gone through permitting. It's $4 million, assigned for the construction of 17 units for rental through the Housing Authority. The second phase is being developed through an RFP, and it will actually provide for tax deed conveyances and incentives to housing authorities for the development of single housing properties. That RFP has not been issued, it's been developed, so that will take us to a second phase. The third phase is mixed income development, and I should highlight that when the strategy was approved in 2019, it was meant to be sequential. So as monies are accruing, they go in to fund the next phase. So we are currently working on phase one, which is being implemented and should start construction soon, and we're drafting the RFP for phase two.
So 6 years in and 17 units that the shovel hasn't hit the ground yet. Yes?
That's our
Okay,
staff.
and we just celebrated the 1-year anniversary of the passage of the American Rescue Plan Act. That's $60 million that we've set aside. How many units do we have in the planning process or constructed a year after the passage?
We have opened up the rehabilitation round for the unincorporated areas, so we've been serving the unincorporated areas, and now we're on round 2 with the unincorporated areas for the housing rehab. I would say, I believe the first round, 50, 60, 70 applications received. We received just under 30 that met the requirements of the program, and so we're going back again. Those dollars will serve at max 80 people, 80 households. So I think this round that we've just recently opened, or will be opening in the next week or so, will take us over on the rehab program.
And we have to have all of that encumbered by 2024. Is that the 2024 calendar year or 2024 fiscal year?
Calendar year.
All right, so we have less than 2 years to have all of that funding encumbered.
Yes. Well, we also did move everything as a revenue replacement, so we believe it gives us some flexibility. We may be able to go past that, but Ms. Baker has told staff that she wants it moved faster and to follow the deadlines under ARPA.
Okay, and I have expressed frustration in some of my agenda reviews. Has any consideration been given to our permitting process being overly burdensome, and that might be one of the reasons we can't get units constructed?
Staffing is a challenge, and it is a challenge throughout, and I've had a discussion with a number of board members regarding challenges. We've done everything we could possibly do, including contracting out responsibilities that the law will allow us to do. We've done that. We're not the only city, county, business that has had challenges. I think there's been articles in the paper that says we've got more jobs than people to fill them. So we are working on that. We have brought in people and trained them to fill those slots.
Right, and I can't remember which one of my brilliant colleagues brought it up about simplifying our permitting process and our code even further. I think we're part of the problem in getting these units constructed, and we need to make it easier. I guess my last question would be penalties. For those developers that have agreed to on-site construction of these units, do they have a time frame in which they are required to have those constructed? And if they miss that deadline, are they penalized?
There are timing mechanisms, yes. On the exchange side of it, a bond is set aside, and we would collect a bond amount not dissimilar to the in lieu if the obligations weren't met. On the on-site and other things, they have a couple different timing mechanisms, one earlier in the process and one later in the process, and it would potentially halt future permitting if they haven't met those. What they would then need to do is return to the board, if it was part of the condition of approval, to change their option for how they would be seeking to meet their workforce obligation.
All right, maybe we need to consider tightening that up. And then can any of the multitude of pots that we have right now, can any of those be used to do a, I don't know, I think a law enforcement like this operation? I'd love to do something, and I'm sorry, I keep singing from the same sheet of music. I'd love to do something like Operation Slumlord, where we go through all of our code violators and we find the most egregious violators. I just got another message over lunch during lunch about another area in unincorporated Pahokee, or Palm Beach County near Pahokee. I would like, we talk about not having land, and then through the lien process of acquiring that land, I want to go after these egregious, disgusting code violators that I call slumlords that are forcing people to live in these conditions. I want to shut them down. I want to demolish those gross structures that no human being should have to live in. I want to foreclose on their property. I want to take their property and I want to give it to a reputable developer who will then come in and build safe, healthy, dignified, affordable housing. Can we use any of these pots of funding to do something like that?
We have had discussions about the first half of it, chasing down our worst violators, those that have liens applied, things of that sort, and taking it to that next degree and looking to, I'm just going to call it acquiring those properties. What you might be able to use of funds for, there's probably abilities out there, or we'll want to take a look at which funds might be best suited to work in those situations. But we've had that discussion and we can work in code in that world.
Conversation, Patrick and I, we've spoken along with Jonathan and Speaker, and the mayor, as a matter of fact, was just smiling, about going after these properties developed, and we do have funding that we can use for that, so we haven't even started the conversation.
Whatever we need to do that, let's do that quickly, sooner rather than later. And then Patrick, if you and your team, watching this last one go through and seeing all of the loophole, or the processes that state statute requires us to go through to be able to go after these, let's come up with a legislative plan of action to eliminate some of those barriers and make this process move faster. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Bernard, you've been very, very patient over there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that's the reason why I'd love to hear from the Housing Leadership Council, and so in that way we can hear about the plan and for us to weigh in, and then we can really go into other remedies that we can use to solve this issue. So if you don't mind, I'd love for us to at least hear from.
Yeah, I think that would be a good course. I know Commissioner Sachs has got her light on. Will you defer until we?
I just have two little quick issues, if I could, Mayor.
Okay.
And then I think that's an excellent idea. We'll move into that. First, it appears from the colloquy we just had that permitting goes quicker for developers who are building new developments and very slow for developers who are building workforce housing. Is that correct, Patrick? Is that what I'm hearing?
I wouldn't necessarily agree. Permitting is as much a function of the quality in and how quickly you do it. I would remind the board as well, in the building permit side of the world, there are statutory limitations on timing and things of that sort, as well as in the zoning side of the world. We're all under the same 6-month restriction, so no one project's going to go any longer. Workforce, now it's still a builder. At the end of the day, they're still building the same thing that has to meet the Florida Building Code.
So the simple answer is there's no difference between the amount of time that a developer will get a permit for a new development as it is for a developer who is building workforce housing.
No difference.
No difference. Okay, that's good. We could, however, as we incentivize developers who build new developments and we give them the incentive to put the funding into this fund rather than put, workforce housing there on their development, we could expedite the permitting for workforce housing. And that way, this could be one of the things we could do. And then one other thing, and then I'll defer, is with regard to taking down, and I hate to use the word slum landlords, because this county should never, ever have to use a word, slum landlord, in this county. If we do not inspect housing units, whether it's apartments in Pahokee or buildings in Palm Beach, we have failed our people. I am sure we do inspections. Do we not?
You certainly do inspections when you're following it through on the permitting side, but as far as a maintenance type inspection?
No, not maintenance, inspections
No,
for
annual
shelter
inspections
for our,
following-
for the people of this county.
Following the successful passing of your permit, once you're approved with your permit, there's no follow-up inspections that are occurring.
Are there inspections that occur subsequent to initial permitting in cities?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Maybe this is another area that we need to go into so that it should never be said that there is slum landlords in Palm Beach County. So maybe this is another issue we look at in our priorities so that if there are places, then legally, once we have this ordinance or whatever policy it is for inspections, then we have that down. Our good legal team will make sure to go in and there'll be a forfeiture of that property. We can proceed.
We have one
Thank-
exception.
I was going to say, Commissioner, for the projects that we fund, we do provide, we do inspect, and that's why we're looking at sufficient affordability periods. I know some people would want a 5-year affordability, 10-year, but we need to have long-term affordability because that affordability restrictions allows us to come in and inspect the units and the developments that we as the county assist.
We are not, the county is not a slum landlord. We're not talking about the county. We're talking about private industry there. So that's part of our duties, constitutional duties as a government, is to make sure we have sufficient available and, well, let me put it this way. I can never pronounce a word, but shelters that are sufficient for human habitation. And that, yeah, I can never pronounce. And that's what we need to do, and this may be one of the issues that we'll discuss during this. Thank you.
Yeah, just a clarification is that homeowners that we have helped in homes with our federal and state dollars, we have a requirement to do inspection.
Government is not a slum landlord. That's not what we're discussing. I know we're good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Just before we leave this topic and get our presentation, we're not devoid of enforcement through code enforcement. And when we have complaints, we are proceeding and we're inspecting. And in a situation like brought up by Commissioner McKinley, someone brings our attention to the fact that there's a deficient situation, we're going to address it. We're not waiting for a new program to start doing inspections, right?
Absolutely correct. We property maintenance code, we enforce those, and then certainly respond to concerns or other things of that very nature and begin to pursue it as aggressively as we can.
Okay, I just don't want the people who are watching this to think that we're just asleep at the wheel and, things are going on out there and we're just letting it go on. If there's a situation that comes to our attention, we are responding to it accordingly.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's have our presentation. Commissioner McKinley.
I just want to add that, Mayor, the issue is this particular property that I've been referencing out in the near Pahokee. It hit my radar in late February, and within 30 days, we did a tremendous amount of work. But it had been in the system for almost 2 years. At that point, when it first hit my radar, this Executive Management LLC, as the property owner, had accumulated $350,000 in code enforcement violations. It took that much to, and then a life safety concern that pushed it to be heard in front of a magistrate. It then took time to get that hearing scheduled, and then the magistrate had to give the property owner a certain amount of days to file permits. And then once, if they had actually met the deadline, which they did not, if they had actually met that permit filing deadline, the magistrate then gave that property owner 280 days to complete the work that the permit was issued for. And that's all because of bureaucratic state statute legal guidelines that have to be followed. A property owner that has those types of violations, those types of liens accumulated, we as a county have no enforcement teeth. We need the legislature to give us more power to be able to shut those facilities down. And that is why I've asked Patrick to try to see if we can come up with a legislative action plan, so we don't have to wait 2 to 3 years to be able to shut these properties down, and we can get that land back in our inventory and reconstruct those units. That's the issue.
Thank you, Commissioner McKinley. Vice Weiss?
Yeah, are we not, just to follow up on Commissioner McKinley's questioning, don't we issue a certificate of occupancy, and can't that be revoked prior to, why wasn't that revoked in this case?
I don't know about the specifics on this one. I would agree with you, yes. In life safety situations, we're at a different level. We're talking about something different than property maintenance type standards.
But when you have conditions like what I saw in those pictures out there, that is clearly a life safety issue, and that certificate of occupancy should have been revoked.
And I'm not familiar with all the details of it and how much information and how there are challenges on property entries and things of that sort. All that is to say, yes.
They didn't have working toilets. They didn't
Understand.
They didn't have drainage in the units. I mean, those are just basic services that every unit is required to have to be habitable. So I don't understand why it would have taken that long to revoke the certificate of occupancy. And, you know, and then if they want to go ahead and take their 280 days or whatever, that's on them, but at least people are not in there paying rent, nor would we allow anyone else to move in behind them.
No, understand.
Thank you. All right, just a housekeeping note. If you're looking at the agenda or your program for the day, it says 2 o'clock, we're doing term limits. Obviously, we are not going to do those right now. This is not a time certain since it's a workshop. It's not a public hearing. So I would say that it's going to be the earliest 3 or 3:30 before we're going to see ourselves talking about term limits or a mayoral referendum. So if that's why you're here, you may want to go get a snack. And if not, let's continue on. Who's going to take this?
Housing Leadership Council, I think it's Skip.
I think Jack's going to make our presentation.
Okay, Jack.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. Thanks
Mr.
for the
Weir, it's always
opportunity
good to see
address
you.
on this urgent issue. First question is, why do we have to do something about housing? It seems pretty obvious, but I just, a few simple statistics here. Before I get started, actually, Jack Weir, Chairman of the Housing Leadership Council, President of Eastwind Development. I have with me Suzanne Cabrera, who is the Executive Director of the Housing Leadership Council, and Skip Miller, who is the Chairman of the Housing Steering Committee and a Public Finance Partner at Greenspoon Martyr. I'm actually, I'm glad that the workforce housing presentation went before us, because I think it was pretty illuminating in terms of both the need and then how the efforts to date have been inadequate. What you're seeing is the results of a long-standing issue where our supply has simply not kept up with the demand from population growth. So this process shifted into overdrive during the pandemic, but in the 10 years before COVID, from 2010 to 2019, the number of units that we produced in the county at all income levels, from studio apartments to mega mansions, was 2,000 units a year short of that which would be dictated by population growth. Basically, on average, we were producing 4,000 units a year. We should have been producing 6,000. This led to a problem, as Ms. Baker has noted. It's been a problem for a while. COVID really shifted it into overdrive. So now the issue we have, in the last 12 months, median rents have gone up 37% in Palm Beach County. This is where you hear the horror stories of people having to leave their apartments that they've been in for years because their rents have gone up $600, $800, $1,000. The median home price in Palm Beach County has gone up over 25% just in the last 12 months. So that means the median housing price is now over $500,000. It's really come to the point where it's not only a housing issue, it's a business issue, it's an economic development issue, it's an employment issue. So the process started 5 years ago with the Housing Summit in May of 2017. And the plan that you have before you, which is a final draft of a plan, represents the work of over 100 members of the steering committee and stakeholders participating in dozens of meetings over the past year. We have tried to draw on the collective wisdom of our community and the differing perspectives to come up with a comprehensive housing plan. So those red are the gaps there. The next one is the focal points of the housing plan. So there are 4 areas: funding and financing, planning and regulatory reform, neighborhood revitalization, and racial equity. So within each of those areas, there are separate initiatives that we put forth, and then under those initiatives, there are recommended actions. All told, there are 58 recommended actions covering a whole spectrum of housing issues. We wanted this to be concrete, actionable proposals that you could look at, that staff could look at, and implement into policy that makes a difference. The centerpiece of this is a dedicated local funding source. And after discussion, we thought that a bond issuance made the most sense. Why do we need a dedicated local funding source? So Florida was a leader in 1992 when it set up the State Housing Trust Fund. They had SAIL for rental housing that could be used anywhere in the state, and then they had the SHIP, which was the Local Housing Trust Fund, which could be adapted to local circumstances. And the program was designed to function in such a way that when the real estate market was strong, more collections went in from dock stamp revenues so that there was more money available to counter the forces of a rising real estate market. That whole system has been turned on its head for the last 20 years because the state legislature had begun sweeping money away, and it does a couple things. The most obvious is $2.5 billion have been diverted from housing to other uses over the last 20 years in the state of Florida. Palm Beach County alone has lost over $200 million. The other thing that was lost was any sense of predictability. There's no idea of how many SAIL funds would be in, how many SHIP funds. I mean, we're in a crisis that should be obvious to all, yet this year the legislature almost zeroed out the SAIL fund, the State Housing Trust Fund for SAIL loans. So we can't rely on the state. They're not going to fix the problems that have been plaguing them, and they're not going to help us. The federal government has the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, which serves up to 60% AMI for the most part, and they have the Section 8 program. Both of those programs are significantly underfunded, and they aim at the lower AMI levels. There is no state and there is no federal program for workforce housing, which has become this critical business issue. Palm Beach County has a larger population than 11 states and the District of Columbia. So you heard the phrase before, but it's very apt here. We need to take control of our destiny. There is no one that's going to help us fix this problem other than ourselves. Every large peer county in Florida, Miami-Dade, Broward, Orange, Hillsborough, or Pinellas, has by this point established a dedicated local funding source. So the next question you may want to consider is why bonds? So the reason we decided on bonds was that a bond issuance offers an immediate impact that can address the scale of the program of this magnitude. What we've been doing with the funds that are available is not working. There are alternatives. One is you can do annual appropriations and you can gradually ratchet up. But $5 million a year is not going to move the needle in terms of addressing this problem. You can do, as some in the county have proposed, a linkage fee. But again, a linkage fee is really another form of affordable housing impact fee. So what you're doing is you're raising the cost of the residential projects that you want to be more affordable, and if it's a commercial linkage fee, you're charging commercial employers and developers to come here when the BDB wants to encourage people through tax incentives and others. You can also do rental assistance. Rental assistance, however, serves as a Band-Aid. It doesn't increase the underlying supply. It just gives the people who are fortunate enough to get it an opportunity to get it, and the ones who don't, there's less supply for them to pursue. And finally, you could do dock stamps, but that requires a legislative change, which is not forthcoming anytime soon. So the benefits of the bond are that, one is it's a sure source of funding around which developers and businesses can plan. There is a certain amount of adaptation period for new programs to be broadly received at the market so that developers can make the decisions they need, tie up the properties, and reliance on those funds will be there for those units they're developing. The funds can be leveraged with private debt depending on which income levels and which rental levels at the AMI you're targeting. Can be as much as 8-to-1, 9-to-1 for gap and debt financing. So you can basically leverage these public funds with a significant amount of private debt and equity. And they're structured as loans so they can be recycled. The other reason to move quickly here is we're now in a rising interest rate environment, which we haven't been for the last 3 years. So it's been relatively inexpensive to borrow funds, and it will be in the near future, but we don't want to delay too long. So Ms. Brown talked this morning about revenue bonds versus GO bonds. So to crystallize the issue, first issue is timing. Revenue bonds can be approved by the board, and revenue bonds we can get started immediately. As the presentation indicated this morning, if we opt for GO bonds, the soonest the GO bonds can be issued is April of 2023, more than a year from now. So we have an urgent crisis. Let's wait a year and get to it. Second thing is flexibility. The revenue bonds provide flexibility to cover all of the intended uses we contemplate under the housing program. GO bonds, based on communications with the county's bond council, there is a real question whether GO bonds can be used for second mortgage assistance for the end home buyers under any program there. The payment issue. Revenue bonds are primarily paid by members, residents of unincorporated Palm Beach County. GO bonds are paid across the board by all the residents of the county. We've sought to mitigate that by saying that any project funded with revenue bonds in a municipality would require a local government contribution. So the citizens of that municipality were in effect kicking in to support that project. So, and finally, the certainty. With the revenue bonds, once the board votes, we know it's going ahead and can plan accordingly. If you do a GO bond, you've got to wait for the ballot, and you really don't know until after the ballot is done. I think we have to be careful with the number of items on any one ballot that we're asking the voters to approve at a time of rising inflation and other issues. So the last thing I would note is based on this debt service schedule here, 90% of the bonds that the county are issuing from a debt service standpoint have been revenue bonds. So the other issue is, will bonds increase taxes? So you had the presentation this morning that the bonds would increase it. We looked at it a little bit differently. We looked at it from a median price of a home of $500,000 and then looked at the assessed value. And we came to a number, if it was a static debt service environment, of $25 for every 200 million, for 200 million in the bond issue. So that's in a static environment. However, as Ms. Brown pointed out this morning, a number of bonds are rolling off in 2024 and 2026. So you can't solve the problem without any new money coming in. So the question is, where do you raise the money from? You can either target specific projects, or you can try and spread it over as much of the tax-paying base as you can. So our approach with the bonds is to spread it over as broad a base as you can so that the individual impact is relatively limited. And I heard you, Mr. Mayor, about the concerns about inflation, but of course, one of the chief contributors to that inflation is rising housing costs. So this offers a way to address that. The goal is ambitious here. It's 20,000 workforce housing units and affordable housing units over the next 10 years. That's 10,000 a unit. So I don't want to represent that the bond proceeds alone will get the job done. They have to be combined with other sources. So particularly if we're targeting lower area median incomes like 80% and 60%, there's going to have to be more funds that are available. There's also a balance that will have to be struck between which groups you're targeting, what rent and income levels, and the number of units are produced. If you said we want to really focus on 80% AMI and 60% AMI units, so that the subsidy would be 40,000 a unit rather than 10,000 a unit, and that's the sole source of funding, then you produce 5,000 units. You don't produce 20,000 units. It is a spectrum. It's really a policy decision for the board to make based on the information that they have. The other thing I wanted to note is that home ownership will be more expensive. It's got a critical role to play. When we had here Housing Steering Committee meetings, we heard loud and clear that stakeholders wanted to have a home ownership element to the program, but it's going to be more expensive. It's going to require an additional source of funds beside bond proceeds. We recommended in the housing plan that the payment in lieu program release rules be liberalized so that it could be used for home ownership opportunities however they were produced, whether they were produced by the workforce housing program or separately. I wanted to just touch briefly, because I want to open it up for questions, planning and regulatory reform. There's a whole detailed section in there. There's 11 specific recommendations, but if I were to summarize it in one line, it would be more density and looking at different types of homes, such as cottage homes. Neighborhood revitalization is going to be a major element of this program. We are constrained by land, yet we have perfectly good land where we have vacancies or dilapidated housing or underutilized commercial areas that can be redeveloped. The goal of the plan is to encourage reinvestment in historically disinvested neighborhoods while mitigating existing resident displacement. It's a dual objective that we're trying to achieve there. And finally, racial equity. We want to both increase access to housing and break down barriers to home ownership to Black residents of Palm Beach County. So at the outset of the process, Administrator Baker gave us a marker. If you're going to come to us with a new funding mechanism, we want you to have the support of the business community. We've delivered on that. Supporting this bond issue and housing plan or the Business Development Board, the Economic Council, and multiple chambers of commerce here. We also have a coalition that includes housing advocacy groups, ranging from the Homeless Coalition to others. We've had discussions with Peace, and we have a broad spectrum of housing advocates backing this as well. It's not only on the county. The municipalities have to play a role, and while we have 39 municipalities, 90% of the volume of the housing units is going to be produced by 15 of them, the ones with the largest populations. And we've made an effort to involve them in the process every step of the way, and we'll continue to do so in the implementation of the plan. The BCC doesn't have to take any action today, but I would respectfully submit to you, if you don't take it, then who will? How will we solve this crisis? How will we make Palm Beach County a better place to live and provide shelter for so many of our residents who are struggling right now? So I'll conclude my remarks. Skipper Suzanne, if you have anything you'd like to add, please do, and then we're happy to entertain any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. And Skip Miller with Greenspoon Martyr. I am the chair of the Housing Steering Committee, and what I wanted to discuss just really briefly is how we would use the proceeds of the bonds. The plan proposes a use of proceeds that maximizes the ability of the county to leverage its bond money. So the plan would be to provide a developer with subordinate gap financing, which basically would provide the last money that goes into the financing stack. So just as an example, if a developer was going to build a 100-unit apartment complex and the cost was $300,000 a unit, we wouldn't be looking for $30 million in bond proceeds. We would be looking at probably somewhere between $3 and $4 million, because it would be up to the developer to provide the equity and the other debt that they need to cover the balance of the cost. So by doing that, with a $200 million bond issue, you're probably going to get well over $1 billion of new housing construction over the next 10 years. And we think it's really, that's different than a lot of the programs that the county has. A lot of the programs that the county has, they're only able to do it using their own money, so they don't have that same leveraging ability. So we think that's a really important feature of this particular plan.
Ms. Cabrera, do you have anything to add?
No, I just think that we put together this broad coalition. It has taken some time because we've tried to get so much input. On our steering committee calls, we'd have over 60 people, and believe me, I think they all contacted me at one point in time. So we really tried to get a broad group supporting this and to bring it forward, because we realize it can't just be the county. So we want to be in the community, public-private partnership to get this done. And that's our only goal here. I worked for the Lord's Place for 12 years and then moved on to this to make sure policies would align so people that graduate from a Lord's Place program have an option and a place to live, and also so that the BDB can recruit higher paying jobs. It's really tough right now because a lot of the service industries, 57% of our workers, they probably need some other options, and we found that out during COVID too, that we have to diversify, and we're not going to be able to do that if we can't attract business and they can't find. That's the number one reason companies are saying they're not coming here right now, is they can't find housing for their middle management, definitely not the lower people on the scale. So we just think this is important, and we want to work together in a partnership and get this done.
Very good, thank you. You know, I was listening to NPR last night, and the thing that caught my ear is that the idea is jobs follow housing. And so that if we don't have housing, the jobs are going somewhere else. And if that's going to be another state or another region of our state, we need to react to this. I personally have a problem with using revenue bonds because of the inequities that are created. And I hear what I heard this morning ringing in my ears: give the voters their say. And if we are going to go forward with this, I am much more comfortable using the GO bonds if they are embraced by our voters, rather than making the decision to go forward on our own. But again, my colleagues may have other feelings on that as well. But we also are going to be dependent on Economic Council and our other stakeholders to advocate, because the legislature has made it very clear that this is not something that we are able to do, to advocate for this kind of a proposal. So it's going to take our partners out there, whether it's the BDB, Chambers of Commerce, or whatever, to be out there and sell this to the residents of this county. That being said, Commissioner Bernard, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Regarding your comment regarding the difference between the revenue bond versus the GO bond, for me, I think that we have a crisis on our hands and that we need to act immediately. And getting the opportunity to get these units out as soon as possible is really important for the residents of Palm Beach County. What we're doing right now in the county is not working. We've allocated millions and millions of dollars, and we're not creating those units. We have to be bold, and we have to take a stand. I'm for doing a combination of a revenue bond or / GO bond, so in that way we can take it to the voters, but still we need to move as soon as possible. Jack, I have a question in regard to, you had mentioned the tax credit. What, on an issue like a 9% tax credit, how does this plan address potentially a 9% credit?
Commissioner, if I could talk about the housing tax credits more broadly.
Please.
As you know, and many in the audience know, there's the 9% housing tax credits, which deliver a higher level of subsidy that can be converted into equity, and 4% housing tax credits that are combined with tax-exempt bonds. On the 9% housing tax credits, they require a local government contribution. That local government contribution is generally in the range of $250,000 to $500,000. It's not capped there, but that's the minimum that's required. We don't propose any change to that because all the tax credit applications that can get funded are being funded. What we do propose is to use these bond proceeds as a form of sales substitute for 4% tax credits and tax-exempt bonds. Those projects require gap financing in the form of sale, which they get from the state, which generally carries a 1% interest rate. It fills the gap between the tax-exempt bond first mortgage and the equity raised through the tax credits. However, in Palm Beach County, often only one or two of those deals can be funded, often through the Housing Finance Authority of Palm Beach County, because of a lack of sale funds. These bond funds would come in and would in effect be a sale substitute. They could enable, rather than one or two, 3 or 4 100% affordable housing projects to proceed by providing that critical gap financing. And we listed in the housing plan, there's an appendix that has bond ranking criteria. The affordable projects at 60% AMI would have the highest ranking. So it's not a set-aside, but it's a priority in terms of allocating the funds.
Follow up, Mr. Mayor. And let's say we do use if someone received the 4% tax credit, potentially, if it's just for gap financing, the per unit cost would probably be less if they have the tax credit and everything else. Is that potentially?
Potentially, it's probably around the same range as the 80% AMI without it. The 4% housing tax credit has less equity. So you have the bonds. There is still a